So I was in a dark lounge place, a public bar, Japan's, where you sit at a kind of is like elegant lounge, have a kind of counter, but the Japanese counter is they have comfortable plush deep seats. It's not just a stool. They're often studded leather or fine fabrics, and they pay special attention to the material of that the counter. It's not granite countertops, and there's a shelf under you can put your things. So it's quite elegant night thing. By the way, this not family show, so do not let children listen. I talk about a nihilistic escape in Oriental nightlife, but besides me, there was a neo-geisha girl, by which I mean she was not wearing traditional outfit, but a thought slut insta-ho type girl with plump ass, which of course is rare in all of the Orient. And this one had pink and white dress. It looked overflowing breast though, and some Japanese women do have this nice tetas. And she had Teta Grande Jomon style, and I was I was by myself, but she was with, I suppose, this Japanese businessman, where earlier, he was an older man, he looked very distinguished, and earlier I made a fool of myself by asking him if he was movie director. Why? Because he had long hair, thick eyeglasses and long hair kind of slicked back, and a leather black vest, with kind of a red ascot. Looked extreme show-offy, did not look like salary-men. Certainly he was trying to put on the artiste style. So, and it worked because she was all over him, even if he was just, maybe he was glorified accountant. I don't know. As it turns out, of course he doesn't say this, but is it fair to mock men for doing, by the way, this where they off hours, they pretend to be, how can you mock this if you have any compassion for men? And yet I remember many years ago I talked to New York Art Ho, and she complained that finance guys would hit on her on the subway in Manhattan, and they'd have bad conscience over just being whatever this guy was. Maybe he was business partner, a big firm, but I don't know what he told me. But they feel lame saying that they are just on Wall Street. So they would say something like, yes, I'm a Wall Street lawyer, but I also spin discs, DJ on weekend, and this kind of thing. And frankly, while this is very awkward on man's part, and I would not suggest this, it makes me angry that that this should even be necessary to tell a woman, because this art hoe actually just ended up being a housewife just the same. But she demanded in her youth that these men beclown themselves with absurd stories as if she's a courtesan from a romantic Flaubert novel, So anyway, these people bore me with their bad English, though. In Japan, I suppose I should learn their language, but after all this time, I still just talk like a retard. So it's a bit boring to try, So then I start looking on my phone, right? And so this video come up of a corporal punishment in Singapore, where a man is about to be caned for public disorder. They cane you even just for littering, apparently. Though I remember seeing litter in Singapore, and there's wild rooster on the streets, and in some of the market, the food hawker market, the rooster will jump on the table. But this man in the video is about to be caned. I don't know, he chewed gum the wrong way, but it was very evocative video because his lithe, lean body is on display. I thought at first this was some kind of modeling shoot for physique display, but he had very nice, lean physique in athletic black shorts and sweaty and splayed out vertically, his body shining, tied up as a man in uniform is about to cane him. Brutal fucking caning with a rod. And as he whipped him, I tell you, that's it, I spontaneously erupted. Okay, because I'm wearing swimming suit, and my prodigious cock stick out from swimming suit leg, and it was everywhere under that elegant counter. I blessed everything with my vital essence, and she squealed in horror and disgust. The man, the wannabe artist, he starts scream at me after his host. She she was shocked, and he started to scream sternly. Now he tried to move this to do the movie thing, the samurai giving orders, that kind. And then the staff rushes over, the water threw towels over as if there was anything to be ashamed, rather than what it was, a celebration of life-giving essence. And I could tell that under their performative nonsense and moral fagging, there was also genuine amazement. They were amazed, almost as amazed as the Japanese men are when I go to onsen public bath. And why should this be? Why couldn't I enjoy a succulent night at the bar where I display my might? And then later at the police station, they stern questioned me. You see, they questioned me. They're very rough with you, the Japanese police. It's like a totalitarian state. You step on a few toes. And I got to shame them, however. I brought up their barbaric treatment of Bobby Fischer, forever a shame to Japan until they make amends. They should make a shrine to Bobby Fischer to make up for what they did to that. He was a hero, and he suffered more at the hands of Japanese and I brought up their treatment of American GIs in camps in World War II in Burma and the Philippines. I throw it all in their face, and not the Korean comfort women thing, though. That's complete bullshit, and I would never, the human rights about that. I love these small Twitter accounts. There's a Japanese girl, I think her name Wakame. You can find her. If you're not on Twitter, I guess a lot of people who listen to my show are not at all on Twitter, but there's this girl, she just posts pictures of flowers and cute cats and roses, completely Japanese account. I don't think she speaks any English. And many cute cat things and cake. The Japanese like to go to traditional cafe, kisaten they call it, I think, and they make like a nice, well-cut piece of cake and coffee, and they do Instagram. And then she would alternate such things with the most lurid, vicious denunciations of Koreans. And, just going on about how the Korean comfort women controversy, this where supposedly Japanese soldiers pressed Korean women basically into sex slavery. So, so this is the story. Taro Aso, the man, the macher of Japan, you see, he's the kind of Tammany Hall party leader boss of Japan's one party, the most powerful party, the Liberal Democratic Party. And this new woman, prime minister, who's now friends with Trump, as I may have mentioned last episode, she's his girl, Black Rain, Osaka. You watch this movie, 1989, Michael Douglas. But Taro Aso is known all over Tokyo, spend an untold amount of money at fancy bars and restaurants. He the Mapo Tofu at, I forget, it's some restaurant in Akasaka. And then the Okura Hotel where Trump recently stayed and I was across from this hotel looking with binoculars into your room, Mr. Trump. But so I bring all this up at the police station, and after psychiatric review, and they decide to release me with deportation order within 24 hours, and that's it. I'm leaving East Asia. I'm leaving the Orient for other seas. Of course, this is why this show is late, because I cannot help being... they didn't cane me, but held me in this station just because I wanted to share with the people in that bar my happiness. And it was spontaneous ecstasy at seeing this Singapore caning video. I mean, do you like this? Do you like the things? What do you think a state would look like if it was ruled by men like me with these kinds? I think this experiment should be tried somewhere. It's an entirely new world, entirely new paradigms. No one knows what's coming next and after Trump. The future wide open. And yes, welcome to episode 200 of Caribbean Rhythms, 200 episodes of something that I can say no one else do what I do. I have no competition, basically, which is why I want to thank all my subscribers. I now have almost 8,000 paid subscribers. This amazing good for me between Gumroad, which I thank the gentlemen at Gumroad, and now I'm also on Substack. So you see, that's very nice because your patronage allows me, the one luxury seems totally lacking in all the media biome, the luxury to say anything that's through my head, which sometimes entertain you, but always, I mean, the luxury to tell you the truth without regard for anything else, including my welfare, my reputation, or anything else, including supposed regard for online friends, which often are who care this? But I tell you that I would have been very happy with 2,000 subscribers. It was my dream. Could I have one day 2,000 when I started this show? But I got there very fast, and it keep going up steadily now. And I'm in a thing where I can endlessly enjoy myself with the finest narcotics, the finest opium and incense from the agar forests of agar groves of Vietnam, and the finest prostitute geishas while I arrange this show for you. But more to the point, I have so many subscribers now that I'm okay, if it came to it, with losing 80% of my subscribers if I have to. I'm comfortable with that. If it means I get to say the truth. See, because I did everything I could to escape the normal fag world where, and I was going to say I have only contempt for people in new media, Biome Online and so on, who look always over their shoulder, who are afraid to say what they think, except that I'm coming to realize, the limiting factor isn't just that. It isn't frankness or the lack of it. It's mostly stupidity or not. It's mostly stupidity is the limiting factor. And so most people are just too stupid and ignorant to be able to tell you anything interesting. They go in circle recycling conspiracy to show you the latest way in which you've been manipulated pawn. How are you shown to be a manipulated victim today and make you jerk off in rage at your own powerlessness? And the basis of that is, of course, tickling your masturbatory sense of righteousness, that you were betrayed, and with them, of course, as the revealers of your helplessness at the hands of Lovecraftian entities. They don't put it this way, of course. But let's talk, ladies and gentlemen, about the JFK assassination again and jerk off in a slightly new ways over boomer mythologies like this. So anyway, it helps also, though, that I have years of reading and not an empty mind. And so I can talk you different topics instead of the same thing every day. I was just, I look now on Twitter before I record, and someone was praising show 100 episodes ago, and they say, this show I have listened for 4 years, and I have learned more in 4 years than in several lifetimes of college degrees. And this is true. I am much too generous with my audience in the knowledge I share with you. Please feel free to steal it. Most of you influencers who try to mine me for content, you have too empty minds to be able to make use of what I say beyond copying. But, the elections were a year ago already. What will you do after? How much of an election can you talk? How much politics? And as Trump heads out, no matter how kinetic the situation goes or doesn't, unfortunately, political life will return to being a sphere of callers and boring pile drivers. So people who can't talk anything else, are in trouble. I learned this, from long years of listening to talk radio, where Michael Savage at his best, not at, when he talks politics, he's just okay, but at his best, when he's talking life or menus or such, or Phil Hendry is an amazing voice performer. I agree with almost none of his politics. But they were not primarily talking about politics. And the best performers never talk mostly about politics. And this is what I hear from my friends who subscribe to this Caribbean rhythms. They appreciate when I talk metapolitics, not the day's events. And the metapolitics can be, for example, the mechanics of militaries training dogs to rape civilians. And if you didn't know, you should search this, because apparently it's a big thing on leftist and Arab Twitter. Thousands of tweets saying the Israeli military has trained dogs to rape Palestinians. Does this excite you? And you, ladies and gentlemen, thought I was a pervert, but at least I don't mask it under moral fantasies, But look, if that's true, I think Trump also has learned, according to some, he's using dogs, kind of a pit bull, a borzoi alternating to rape migrants at Bukele's death camps on the beaches of El Salvador. Possibly tens of millions of migrants have already been processed into Trump tacos. This poses a civilizational. Did you pray for brown people today? The Bronze Age warriors need immediate United Nations Congolese peacekeeping forces to prevent mass canine rape squads. Do you believe in canine rape battalions? Russian military intelligence is also looking into rape dog battalion gap. They are not to be left behind on the rape dogs. So, look, as I leave East Asia, where I'm forced to be an incel, because, I need to be honest with you, unlike many weebs, the white men who live in East Asia, I have zero sexual response to the peoples here, I'm a Volcel in these regions. I'm sorry if this is kind of awkward declaration, but people assume that when you're a white man who live in East Asia. I just want to disavow any notion that, I can't speak for Mark Faber in Chiang Mai. I hear for Mark Faber, the famous investor, it gets up to Alexander VI, Pope Borgia levels there. Look, I'm joking. I don't know. Do not sue me in this. But, I'd like this. I'd like it to be true. I'd like to find a truly pathological girl slut. I've been trying this, but people are just so boring today. They never talk to me about art hoes. They all end up being Grushenka from Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov. Do you know this character? Very famous character in Russian literature, where you hope for a pathological femme fatale uber slut, but it ends up being a hurt, lonely girl who just wants to be loved. And that's Grushenka. That's the art hoe, and this was my experience actually stalking endlessly, as I've told you, from the first episode of this show, Caribbean Rhythms, where I want to fixate that rush of unrequited love is ultimate drug, but it doesn't work in the end because it ends up that I do it knowing that they're not what I imagined them to be, So anyway, yes, Singapore caning as a punishment for, I think that as a punishment for crime is a lot better than jail. Do you agree? A far better deterrent. And it isn't that the most rational use of criminal penalties as a deterrent. I can't imagine anyone believes that jail actually rehabilitates. I mean, that's the excuse of putting them in jail as an educational enterprise. And meanwhile, the same people who argue for that wink wink about the rape you will get in jail, which incredibly craven and cruel. Why don't you just rape them like in Singapore? I mean, or in ancient Greece, the penalty for certain kinds of sodomy and also for adultery was the radish. It was to have a radish inserted in front of an audience into your anus, which I believe by a radish, they didn't mean like a small radish. They meant like a daikon, like a Japanese size, usually led to death, by the way. So having talked to people who did time, by the way, in jail, it's not that rape doesn't happen, but there are ways to protect yourself, apparently. Don't assume that everyone who's done time has been raped in the ass, It only happens to some who don't know how to protect themselves, don't know how to forge alliances, or cannot fight to protect themselves. If you put up a fight, I don't think you generally get raped in jail. But Trump, he's one of the most powerful rapists in American history. And you are all stuck in jail with him, the prison life of the West. And I think after he retires, America will miss his rape of the Statue of Liberty. I saw it in a Washington Post illustration. Listen, this is a special fun episode where I will explain for you my love of Asia very briefly, some of my travels in Asian cities, just a little bit, but in particular my love of Singapore and the man who founded this Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew. I'll reflect in the next segment after music's break. I'll reflect on his achievement, but also this episode I want to tell you yet again what my central concerns throughout from time I wrote Bronze Age Mindset book and to now. And so then the coming short, of Singapore, the fundamental limitation of the modern city where even if you were, let's say, to get a maximal solution to all the problems in America today, all the contentious debates that people are having now, which most of it is fake, it's just influencers angling as they see it for media positioning. They want attention because it's an election off year. But there are high emotions from people in political life too. Let's concede that, and that it's not just about their careers. But all these supposed debates, let's say you solve them in the best possible way, even if you were to solve all the looming problems and crises of America and Europe that are preoccupying pundits and so on, you'd still end up in a kind of iron prison, a kind of jail. And this is not to demoralize you, but but the opposite, to remind you what means true possibilities of life and true greatness. And that's my real concern, not these other things. Because now, as you enter the end of the first year of Trump's historic comeback, it is dawning maybe on many of you that there are persistent, crushing problems, especially for America's and Europe's young people who live in unemployment and underemployment, not just now and since the pandemic, but in fact, as far back as I can remember. And not only the young, by the way, I can tell you, they carry this sense of loss throughout. I know old people who have carried the same sense of jail throughout their lives, no matter how outwardly successful they may look to a normal fag. A normal fag could not believe that an executive or a high-powered lawyer at such and such famous corporation, but men admit to me in private many dark things, men of all ages, and I will give you briefly what I remember from my own life and that of other people I've known, to show you why almost everyone today, to some extent, feels prison of this existence, press, suffocate their heads. This is the theme of the second part of my book, by the way. I called it The Iron Prison for a reason, and that's the, best part maybe of Bronze Age mindset, but I hope to tell you this not in a spirit of complaint or, as usual, when pundits do jeremiads to strike out against the degeneracy of modern conditions and such, which gets very tedious, but to show you that with respect to history, the key to new possibilities and bold paths outside this corrosive swamp, to show you, and the pure upper air of hills and mountains, where you commune with the animals, the mountain goat especially, and his hoarse voice, the satyr goat-like vehemence of the mountain goat. Yeah, the mountain wolf in whose chest revs a spirit, tireless ferocity. All the animals, I mean, of the mountains, of the upper air, closest to the gods, of the clean upper air, unpolluted by women and mere life, where you can hope to escape this fatal gravity. And it has always been my will to try to find a path to that upper air, but then I leave you before I come back and talk my brief experiences with Singapore and some reveries on the history of that city and of the greatness, actually, of the men who forged it. Lee Kuan Yew, a truly ancient man of power in the modern world. It's like a founder of a city as per any ancient model, any great city founder from Greek history. And nevertheless, because of the circumstances in which we find ourselves, the final fruit of what he made was fundamentally limited. That's not his fault, though. He did his best. And I leave you before with this nice music, which for special show, I play one. Allow me this indulgence, finally, for episode 200. It's one of the most beautiful recording of music ever for me throughout this episode. Nikolai Golovanov conducted Rachmaninoff Symphony No. 2 in Moscow, 1943. So 1943, you can imagine what happened. And remember, Rachmaninoff had been banned after 1917 in the Soviet Union because he was, a Russian aristocrat, and the whole communist thing happened. But now, and it's out of national feeling, at its moment of existential to be or not to be, as Russian military attempt saving last-ditch effort, they play this music in Moscow out of defiance. And it's not the music of communism, it's the ultimate music of the Tsarist old regime. I will be right back. I am a credit to the white race in Japan. I told this to the police officers at the station. And look, the Malay crisis is one of a few modern cases of Western states solving an insurrection, where the British put Malaysian revolution or insurgency, one of few cases of so-called nation building, out of which emerged two stable states, Malaysia and Singapore eventually. It took place roughly from 1947 to 1960, this crisis, insurgency. They called it the Malay emergency, in what was then self-governing British colony Malay Federation, which was enormously valuable exporter of rubber. It's interesting, the tropics had a rubber rush, and much like you're acquainted with gold rush. I know of Sephardic Moroccans went in large numbers to Brazil around 1900 or so to get rubber from the Amazon. And the British stole in the late 19th century tens of thousands of these seeds, and some of these seeds succeeded, germinated. They tried to plant them in India, Southeast Asia, and in Malaysia is where it later became world's largest producer, with this, the British taking South American. So I don't think the American effort in the Philippines, though, was fully successful at nation building, by the way. There's still insurgency in the Philippines to this day. Insurgency is just a sign that there's no lasting national state. And the false success of America thought that it had in building the Philippines led, unfortunately, to made similar mistake in Vietnam, or of course it was complete failure. But a resolution to insurgency, which is adjacent to nation building, if you really want this, you need actually exercise extreme measures. And the British did that in Malaysia. I mean, another insurgency resolution is like Germany in the East Front. But let's not go there, you say, where what the Germans did to the Poles and the Russians. Well, it's true, though. The German railroads were manned by Polish, and the Germans could rest assured that they would not be sabotaged, because they would you know what they would do. But the rebellion in Malaysia was communist guerrillas under Malayan National Liberation Army, which was widely supported by the Chinese minority of Malaysia, which it's called a minority, but it was a very large minority, something like 30-40% of that territory. I think not counting the part that includes Singapore. So it was really a vehicle for Chinese revolution, roughly at the same time that Mao took China. But I'm not saying they're related. Actually, I think as a matter of sociology, it would be interesting to look into economic, ethnic, sociological reasons why large merchant middleman minority would move for communism in modern world in conditions of rapid nationalization. It's a bit counterintuitive to think a commercial minority would do that, but not really if you think it through, because both here in Malaysia and in Europe, where enthusiasm for Bolshevism swept through the Jewish communities there around the turn of the century, seems to be something in common. There could be a deeper convergent evolution reason, sociologically, why this happens. But anyway, to defeat this, the Brits took drastic measures. They weren't going to let the commies have them lose Malaysia, and this was so important for their economy. I'm not sure if this is true. I've read that the rubber exports from British Malaysia, at least after the war, were more valuable than exports of much of domestic British industries in England itself, So what they did, they formed these so-called new villages to protect the Chinese minority from the guerrillas and the insurgency. They herded essentially into concentration camps, barbed wire, watchtowers, and the whole thing. So, you have to have some means like that to filter the population in this way. So you can claim, well, BAP, what do you mean? You're using a euphemism. What do you mean protect the population? After all, you said the Chinese supported the guerrillas. Well, that means maybe 20-40% have sympathy, or even if a half has theoretical sympathy, much fewer of that population would have active sympathy in the sense of being willing to do something for guerrillas on the run. The people, who actually would support them, give them cover and safe haven willingly. But then there are others who don't want that. And even those who do, are essentially living under threat of murder from the guerrillas. The guerrillas own the night. So if you have weak policing as a colonial power, which this has been America's problem in its recent misadventures in the Middle East as well. You have police come during the day. I have many veterans told me this story about their time in Afghanistan. They would patrol an area and the village headman would come out and said, please, I'm being honest with you. The Taliban was here yesterday. I had to entertain them. Please don't kill me. They thought the Marines would kill them. Please don't kill me. I had no choice. The Taliban came through and, my daughter has her wedding the next day and I have to. So that's usually the pattern. Locals are afraid the guerrillas will kill them if they don't cooperate. And without huge policing, a population essentially becomes prey and is unable to help central government even if they want to. So extreme brutality, like the Germans used on the Eastern Front, where, I was going to say they killed the family of the Polish. They didn't quite do that, but they would wipe out the men of a village if somebody took a pot shot at a German soldier. That also works. But short of genocide level things like that, you have to either herd the population into protected camp-like settlements, or otherwise you police them minutely with your own guerrillas. I remember, by the way, General William Odom, a friend of mine, as staunch an opponent of the Iraq war as there ever was, and he said, well, if you kill a couple of million of them, they would pipe down. And he was not advocating that, but saying, that would work. That's what you'd have to do if you tried that. That would actually end the insurgency. So I don't have a lot of respect, by the way, for people now like, I don't want to even say names. There are certain pundits, they're famous, others like that, who wax self-righteous over Iraq or other things, pretending that they would have opposed it on principle if they had known, So, in fact, they never opposed, they were adults at the time of that war, and they never opposed it. And the only reason they oppose it now is because it didn't end well. It was not won. But if America had had unambiguous victories there, no matter how many people it would have offed, everyone would have cheered it on and still would. So I know it's a bit ambiguous, the whole self-righteousness about that. But yes, the British also brought in headhunter, tribesmen from Borneo. They took scalps, collected skulls, the Iban. They live on the inner rivers of these Indonesian islands. They're savage men of the jungle. You can find them in old stories, including in Conrad. They bring them. The British you can find photographs of Iban warriors in British uniform and beret running around with scalps, from the 1950s. You need to use a little bit of terror like this. But even when you're a civilized insurgency put downer like the British are. But following the resolution of this crisis, Malaysia, so the crisis ends around 1960. Then Malaysia becomes actually an independent state a little later in 1963. And the Brits actually stuck around as, military advisors and such for about another decade after that. And in the south of Malaysia, at the Straits, the Malay Straits, choke point of commerce from Asia to the rest of the world, there is Singapore, founded by Britishman Raffles in the 19th century. And if you can stay at it, I highly recommend the Raffles, one of the most amazing hotels in the world. It's still, it had a period of decay, but it was reformed in the last decade, and it's one of the nicest places I've ever stayed. The architecture, glory, colonial, tropical England. Many of the I will write complete hotel review for you. Many of the grand hotels of Europe, so on, places where Prince Charles stayed, like the Hassler and such, they lack magic feel. They're just a nice hotel and it's not worth it. But something like the Raffles has its own magic aura. It has something. But anyway, in this place, Singapore, they're congregated, large number, Chinese of different kinds. You see, there are Straits Chinese, so-called. Chinese are all over that part of the world, in certain islands of Indonesia, and if you cross the Straits and into Indonesia itself and in Borneo, There are Malaysian Borneo too. There are Chinese all over there already, but they congregated in this urban center founded by the British. So the overseas Chinese are motley of various, mostly from South China. Teochew, Hakka, Hokkien, Cantonese, many kinds of Chinese men's, traders and merchants, but large numbers, so much so that following independence, Singapore, being a province of Malaysia, became big source of tension within that country. The reasons were that the Malay state was born, frankly, ethno-nationalist state for the, call them what you want, the Austronesians, the Malays, the same people essentially as live in Indonesia. But the Malays, and they enacted to begin with a kind of affirmative action law in favor of the Malays, even though they were the majority of the country, technically. And it's obvious why they did it. It's rational for them to do. Without this, their entire economy and industry would have been Chinese-dominated. That's what the Chinese do in that part of the world. I'm sorry for my libertarian friends, but it doesn't work this way. When you have competing ethnic groups, you can't have completely race-blind meritocracy because the group of lesser abilities would have to accept perpetually foreseeable subaltern status. And they won't accept this. Why would they accept? I think, what's her name? Amy Chua. I forget these. One is Amy Chua, one is Amy Wax. I think it's Amy Chua, and she writes about middlemen minorities. And I think she comes from an Indonesian Chinese family or a Filipino Chinese family. They completely dominate the economies of Southeast Asia, unless there are these kinds of affirmative action laws on behalf of the natives enacted. And, when they dominate the economy to that extent, eventually there are pogroms against them. I mean, there's massive resentment against the locals won't just put up with it indefinitely, So it's just so stupid, by the way. I've complained before about the whole human biodiversity thing, where you have these racist dorks with their IQ charts, and they think they will convince, for example, black people and their defenders that blacks are stupid by nature, so they should accept the results of economic competition, which ends with them on the bottom. So obviously they won't accept it, and even if you convince them that they are inferior, they'll say, well, for that very reason, they deserve special treatment. And the Malays readily did this. I mean, I don't know if they put it in those words. They'll say, we are the Malays, we are the gentlemen of East Asia, we're lazy, we like to take it easy, we're not going to work like these Chinese rats. I don't know what they call them. They must have some word for the derogatory word for the Chinese who work so hard. Excuse if I repeat this, I must have said it recently, but the Thai king complained about this 100 years ago. The Chinese work too hard. We can't compete with that. It's absurd. And the Malays say we don't have that and are not interested in that work ethic, and we don't have their abilities, frankly. And still, though, that doesn't mean we want our national economy in our own country dominated by another ethnicity. How is that in our interest? And what do you say then? You can come up with your IQ monkey chart, so they deserve it, And by the way, I kind of agree with the Malays in that calculation. I don't think the inability or unwillingness to grind in a modern economy is necessarily a sign of inferiority. But racial tensions erupt in this port city, Singapore, after 1963 or around that time especially. Racial riots, frankly. The Malays are claiming that Lee Kuan Yew, dominates Singapore already. The chief politicians of Singapore and Chinese. He's Chinese, and they say he's oppressing the Malays. You can eat. There's a nice food court. I think it's Pajar Pansir, something like that. It's in that part of the island. There's a very nice food court I recommend, and they have good cuttlefish barbecue. But there were ethnic pogroms there against the Chinese. The Malays chimped. They did a monkey Southeast Asian chimp out, and people died in those riots. It got bad. Economic disagreements mounted. Singapore was obviously much richer than the rest of the country, and they said, we will give free loans to this and fund this and that. And then, of course, there were tensions over that. So now Lee Kuan Yew, he didn't want to separate. He actually wanted Singapore to remain in Malaysia to become its kind of New York, okay? He wanted a multiracial, peaceful Malaysia, with Singapore included, but it was not to be, especially because whereas Malaysia was, and until recently was, the attack, until recently it was 30 to 40% Chinese. Now it's less. I've met Chinese from Malaysia, recent arrivals in Singapore, who told me, and they had menial jobs. They were hair cutters and similar, and they would say, I couldn't live in Malaysia anymore because we used to be 35% of the population, and now we're 20%, and we're ever more squeezed dry. Something like that is what he said. So they're all leaving Malaysia for China or for Singapore. And Singapore was something more like 80% Chinese or something like that at the time of independence, or I don't know exactly. But so Singapore would have taken the Chinese percentage in Malaysia as a whole close to 50% or over 50% Chinese. So it would have been essentially a Chinese majority country with a preponderance of that in Singapore, right? And that was just unacceptable to the Malays. So there had to be a separation, took place in 1965. Singapore became, for better or worse, and maybe against Lee Kuan Yew's original wishes, it became a kind of Israel for the overseas Chinese. So what would you have predicted to come out of all this, by the way? Because here you have a Chinese leader of a Chinese majority city breaking apart in a rather traumatic way from Malaysia, economic and especially racial tensions, both with respect to Malaysia but also within the city of the Singapore itself. A dose of communism thrown in, while the Chinese population was the special base just a few years before of a frightful communist insurgency. Now remember, Chinese civilization at this time, whatever may have been its remote antiquity, it was not easy to predict that a city like Singapore would come out. In fact, I think Singapore is still the only Chinese civilization city that doesn't smell bad. It's not like the Chinese were building gleaming commercial centers back then. It was Hong Kong was also built by the British. An interesting story about that, Rogue Scholar Books tells me, the books Taipan and Noble House tell the story of Singapore. Clavel wrote them, the same man who wrote Shogun. And apparently, Ayn Rand was very jealous of this man, Clavel, for these two books, Taipan and Noble House, especially Taipan, the story of the British foundation of Hong Kong. Why? Because it is truly a story of heroic capitalism that Ayn Rand tried to tell in a fictional form in her books. But this man, Clavel, told fictionalized true story of Hong Kong much better, apparently. This is what I hear. In any case, Lee Kuan Yew was always hugely impressed by Hong Kong and wanted to reproduce the British success there on the Straits. But it was not by any means given that Chinese had it in them at that time in history to create such a thing. I'm telling you, the very difficult situation of Singapore at the time, what would you predict to have come out of all this mix of political strife, communism threat, racial tensions, racial chaos within Singapore itself, you could say. It was a motley state of squabbling ethnic groups. And I will quote one of my favorite Cold War commentators, Hilaire de Berrière, from just a few years after Singapore's independence, to show you that even very smart men can be wrong, of course, but Berrière thankfully ended up being wrong about Lee Kuan Yew and what I'm about to read you. But this is what it looked like at the time to anti-communists, okay? This was written like what I'm about to read you, 1969. Okay, so I read you. Singapore. Again, a book could be, I'm reading now from Hilaire de Berrière's newsletter. Singapore, again, a book could be written on Singapore and the rabble-rousing Chinese prime minister who your press would have you believe has seen the light and become a conservative anti-communist. Let me just take a quick interruption, right? Berrière refers to Lee Kuan Yew as rabble rousing, okay? So you're used to hearing about Lee Kuan Yew maybe as a technocrat, a libertarian dictator, kind of quiet type, right? But I've told you before, he was not like Salazar in Portugal, who was a college professor and was this kind of quiet. Lee Kuan Yew was a passionate orator, demagogue as well throughout his life. He wasn't, his opponents, in other words, could plausibly say he was a rabble rouser. Anyway, I go back now. Rabble rousing Chinese prime minister, who your press claims has seen the light and become a conservative anti-communist, now that he is faced with the reality of Chinese expansionism and British withdrawal by the end of 1971. Lee Kuan Yew, known as Harry Lee, actually that was his name, Harry Lee, but Lee Kuan Yew, known as Harry Lee, dominates the 224 square mile city-state through his extreme left People's Action Party, PAP. Powerless and serving only as a sop to Singapore's Malaysian minority is President Yusof, whom Lee humiliates in public. Behind the arrogant Chinese prime minister, but ever present, even on formal occasions, is the unkempt, unshaven, coatless and tieless Britisher, Alex Josey, who serves as a combination of grey eminence and local Arthur Schlesinger Jr. Berrier is here referring to JFK's leftist kind of Jewish house intellectual. Look up Arthur Schlesinger. Ex-OSS, typical of the founders of the new left that came in with the JFK administration. Anyway, I keep reading. So disturbing are Alex Josey's red record and actions to Singapore's anti-communist neighbors. Josey is barred from entering Malaysia when Lee Kuan Yew goes to Kuala Lumpur to visit the sumptuous home he bought there. Whether his home was acquired as a place of potential refuge if his own policies backfire on him, or a future command post in preparation for the day when he is ready to mobilize the Chinese in neighboring countries and enlarge his domain under Peking support, no one can say. End quote. So, okay, that ended up being wrong, thankfully. But the thing that Berrier could make this case plausibly in 1969 and not sound completely insane, right? As paranoid as all of that may seem today, it was remotely plausible to say that in 1969, given the unhealthy stew out of which Lee Kuan Yew had to emerge and operate. And this was in the context of the next two paragraphs. I won't read them for you, but Berrier is complaining that American business executives were invited to Singapore and then that MIT was also invited to advise on technological and industrial modernization. So basically, Lee Kuan Yew was very early already hard at work doing what he became famous for. But his political origins and environment out of which, he emerged were so disfavorable that it arguably could look like something entirely else at that time. And the People's Action Party was not extreme left, as Berrier said. And in fact, they had to fend off many political challenges, both from their own local communists and local ethno-nationalists. And here is Lee Kuan Yew putting down not quite a full insurgency or rebellion, but it was a major political challenge, a kind of semi-coup by the local leftist communists. This is a quick recording from a rally he led in 1963. Now, that's the year that Malaysia became independent from Britain. But he is leading the people in Hong Lin Green, this is central area Singapore, leading them against these breakaway commies that were trying to take over the state. And I have a new slave. It's no longer Brennan. Brennan has been processed at Guantanamo Bay. He's no longer an issue. But I have a new slave who I will reveal their identity at my leisure. Slave, play a recording of Lee Kuan Yew putting down the communists.
We never run away from a fight and never will. This is the only country we've got. And I say to them, they can chase out the British governors because they can all retire with good pensions in Britain. But they can't chase us out because we have nowhere to go and we will fight. So I say, over the next few weeks, as you see how things progress, remember this. The ultimate fight is between the communists and those who can put up a challenge, give them a run for their money. We know them, and I say this without immodesty. We worked with them, that's why we know them. We know all their tactics, we understand the mechanics of the game, and we intend to ensure that the country survives. In August last year, right here, they were blaring with shouts and slogans, you know, as we were speaking, and we allowed them to speak. This is the communists. Well, I say to them, carry on.
One moment, let me stop it for a second. Newsom, you stop. That's right, Gavin Newsom is my gimp. He give me foot massage while I perform show for you. But let me stop recording there for a second. It's another interesting aspect, by the way. Very often the most effective such leaders come out of the left because they can build new coalition for one, but also they know how the left operates, as you just heard in that clip. Bukele is like this too, okay? He come out of a El Salvador left. And if the left was not so anti-white male in the United States, I would encourage some young among you with clean records to make your way through the Democrat Party and to become an actually based Gavin Newsom. You hear that, Gavin? Not... But, I mean, maybe Democrats will change their ways and welcome white men back in, and you can do that, because that may be the salvation of the United States long term. A man who come out of the left but in fact ends up being like this and caring about the prosperity and peace of his nation. I wish all the luck to Vance and to others, but seeing the current condition of the right in general, I cannot say that what is crystallizing into post-Trump has any long-term prospects one way or another. Now, 2026 and 28 aside, the left is so hollowed out it may lose these next elections no matter what. But in the long term, I'm talking long term. But let me go back to Lee Kuan Yew. Dramatic climax to his standing up to this basically communist rebellion from his own party in his own rule in 1963.
The open argument, the open debate. And I say, not we will win, but righteousness and the interests of the people will triumph. Will triumph over evil and deceit, provided we are always united together. If we allow this kind of stupidity to ruin the country, then I say we deserve to perish. And I say it is your duty and mine to make sure it doesn't perish. We let it go on, doesn't do any harm, provided they don't take up stones and sticks and guns. But my last word of exhortation is, we have so much at stake. We have gone so far to secure the country. I say rally around and keep these evil forces. You see, they are so ashamed of themselves, they have switched the light off. Look at that. They are cowards, that's what they are. Cowards. They switched the lights off. Look at that. Are these men who are going to lead you to peace and prosperity, or to ruination and perdition? Look at them. God knows what they're doing in the dark. When I say this, they succeed on the basis of intimidation. And I say, if they make the error that we are easily intimidated, then they have a lot to be sorry for, because you know we have so much at stake we can't afford to be intimidated.
Yes, you hear this? Do you hear this, Mr. Trump? You need to take on the left. After Charlie Kirk assassination, I called for quiet and careful planning in the sense that you should not act with emotion, but dismantle the left and Antifa at its sinews with a plan rather than just give emotional satisfaction, immediate red meat that wouldn't have consequences. But by that I meant within a few weeks or a month. But now it's maybe 2 months later and Antifa is as bold and active as ever. More important, its funders continue to walk free men, operate impunity, these leftist billionaires, just arrest them, throw them in jail. And Lee Kuan Yew also spoke of the necessity of just expelling communists from education and professorships. You maybe can't do that in America without dictatorial powers, but there are other things you can do. You can free the youth from dependence on the educational system in various ways. That can mean, for example, opening up white-collar professions to non-degree holders, allowing exams and such, maybe encouraging employers to hire by exam instead of degree. 100 episodes ago, I called on Mr. Trump. I called him a dope on this show because of what was going on back then. And I do that lovingly because he's, in fact, the only man in our time worthy of being called possibly great. And I actually think he's received unfair criticism. The Trump administration has had indubitable results on immigration, with first time in decades refugees and immigration reversing and many such things, and that's what I care about. And this, that and dismantling the far left, I think there are a couple of billionaires now. There's Soros and maybe the Reed guy, and I think that you can get them under. They're funding a terrorist organization, right? But in the last week or two, I don't want to get into this. Mr. Trump misspoke and said some silly things in public, and it's allowed bad actors to capitalize on that. And I think maybe regain plot in messaging on immigration and in taking on the left, but also perhaps address now concerns of your own supporters, especially among the youth who are graduating from college, unable to find a job. And to dismiss their concerns about affordability is not right. To dismiss their concerns about the fact that, since well before Trump, it's become impossible to build wealth in America for a young person starting out. Everyone faces dead-end prospects, essentially a life of servitude. That's what that means. And this is very bad. If anyone administration is listening, and you must take this problem head on, not with meaningless pandering or whatever Democrats have in mind, dispersal of benefits that leave people equally hopeless for the future. There must be drastic reforms that only you can undertake now, the reforms that privilege youth and look to the future and the prospects of amassing wealth and freedom for the capable. Without that, they'll have no incentive not to abandon you and burn it all down, frankly. I'll just give you one example. DeSantis, this governor of Florida, for my foreign listeners, he wants to revoke property taxes, which from a purely libertarian point of view, I understand why it's unjust on paper that you should have to pay taxes on a home that you already paid for and you own. But given the fact we live in a very heavy regulatory environment with heavy taxes on income, where wealth is amassed and locked down by vapid boomers who are drawing also money out through Social Security and other means, this one measure by itself, rebuking or lowering property tax, only solidifies the hold of the boomers on things, while make life harder for the young, destroy also the basis for public infrastructure and the like. You have a chance now to take a goat by a horn, wrestle it, do something especially about the crushing debt that young people live under that's making their lives impossible. Reform drastically, and I'm telling you, you'll get more shite for this than for migrant raids, but you'll have to do it. I said it in my China article. Do something about employment regulations, things that actually free up the economy and the job market. And concurrent with the expulsion of H-1B and immigration pressures, it would allow America's own young, and especially young men, a path in life and economic and career opportunities that they don't have now. Right now, there's a female dominatrix boot on everybody's neck. This is why I'm saying you'll get more resistance if you take this path, but it's worth taking. Because how to get rid of the evil influence of whatever it is that privileges mediocre males and women and makes companies in America uncompetitive, full of people who lack the will to take any risks and make any innovations. This reason that American exports are not competitive and American productive economy is moribund, you'd have to solve this. And then the H-1B and Indian thing is a disaster, by the way. Of course, everyone knows that now. The H-1B thing, the wholesale replacement of your professional class, in this case, unfortunately, by Indians who are allowing themselves to be used for demographic warfare. I wrote this article a week ago. It got some chimp-out attention from everyone. It's about the flood of Indians as a replacement professional and white-collar class in America and to some extent in Europe. I hear it's quite bad in Switzerland. And it's written from the point of view of someone who rather likes India. Me, I like India. I have nothing against Indians as such. But everyone hates me for this article now. The Indian nationalists attack me, the anti-Indian people attack me, and the religious people attack me too. I make friends every day. But this is what I mean. It's the luxury I have to always speak the truth as I see it, no matter who ends up hating me. I'm not online to make alliances and glad hand and friends and so on. I say there, this isn't a case like importing an underclass of Oaxacans who install drywall and, it's a wall of 4'7" people with pockmarked faces at 6 a.m. in front of Home Depot. That may destroy your own underclasses. It may put your professional classes, though, in a desperate position to bring their own replacements. That is different. It's a condition for massive social strife. And at the very least for losing a generation of voters. So maybe you wake up, learn from Singapore example most of all, where Lee Kuan Yew did whatever was necessary, secure economic progress, and thereafter some generations of Singaporeans grew up experiencing only improvements in quality of life. This also experience of people in China for the last 20 or 30 years. You're a small boy, your parents move when you're 5 or 6 into a better apartment and then a better one, and you only know things getting better. That creates great optimism for, is not what America has now. Now, maybe that's too high a call, but at least make an effort in those two things to kick out H-1B competition that makes life and, frankly, everything else shitty for everyone, and then reform employment, regulation and so on to favor economic advancement of bright young people. And I can give you names and advices for economic thinkers. Not me, I'm not, but people who can give you concrete advices in this regard. Menaquin on 4, for example, or there are certain even Twitter posters, but there are also established economists, maybe even within your administration, who you should listen to. But you see, as a political founder, Lee Kuan Yew, and this is why his achievement is all the greater, he had to operate atmosphere of crisis. He moved from what I played for you just now as a coup attempt, right, by commies essentially, constant challenges by language and ethnic and religious identitarians, he called them chauvinists. It's a political mess, communist subversion, ethnic strife, surrounded by two powerful, hostile neighbors with extensive ties to your own substantial restive minorities. Most political leaders, most nations wouldn't have made it in this situation. And this question of human capital, right? Singapore does not have naturally high human capital, okay? The Malays, yes, famously lazy in Southeast Asia. Then there are Indians. That's about 10% Indian population now. I don't know what it was at the time of independence, but that's itself a fractious community. About half the Indians are Tamils from South India, others are Punjabi Sikhs, and then there are others. It's an Asian port city, okay? It's the ultimate seedy, go-through port of the South Seas, okay? No matter how cleaned up it is, it still has third world feel and characteristics at times. There are Indian day laborers or whatever having lunch on a lawn outside a building and so on, and the Malays are themselves, my Chinese friends don't like Malays. They say they smell bad. But then there's this Chinese majority. And so the overseas Chinese, so-called, are commercially successful middleman minority in that whole area compared to native populations. It's not like they're genetic supermen, okay? It's the same like you go to West Africa, sub-Saharan West Africa, and all of the commerce is run either by Greeks, Italians, or Lebanese. Now these peoples will say I'm attacking them, but they run it there, whatever. And then the Lebanese run also Central America, and Palestinians in some cases too, also, by the way. But the Chinese are successful there only. Let me put it this way. If you go to Chinese communities in parts of Malaysia and Indonesia, they can dominate them in terms of commerce, but it's not like they have it in them of their own abilities to build skyscrapers or whatever. It's, they can run a dry goods shop. It's kind of like what you can imagine a Jewish peddler did in a Polish village, something like that. It's a corrupt merchant-cased community, okay? Hokken merchant selling you human blood supplement pills in a dark shop on an alley, with like smelling of bats, right? It's more like that. That's the kind of commercial success you're talking about. There's a good thread by poster Mythos Noir about this kind of underworld Singapore, where these kinds of black magic supplements in Singapore, okay, the dark side, the base of the population there, which still forms 73% of Singapore's citizens, the overseas Chinese, it's the kind of prototypical scammy Chinese merchant thing, okay, that you can imagine from Tales of the South Seas from 150 years ago, running like a poker parlor, and half poker parlor, half brothel somewhere in Makassar. So out of this mess of foreign pressure, political danger all around, both from commies, foreign nations, differing ethnic and religious populations that aren't especially gifted to begin with, not counting the ethnic strife that's there between them, Lee Kuan Yew still manages to create skyscraper, gleaming garden city, jewel city of Asia, right? It's still, I think, the premier Chinese city, better than the cities of China itself. And his achievement is all the more amazing, when you see what he had to work with. It's an instructive case of the only founders of new state in modern world. I think it's very telling that it had to be a city-state. Modern nations are maybe too large to allow the genius of one man as political artist to be displayed in this stark way. But yes, from antiquity there are many examples. No doubt their story, however, came down to us considerably cleaned up and edited. When you read a story of founder of this or that Greek colony in southern Italy who became worshipped as a god and so on. But here you have a vivid case in our own time. You can read, I think actually Alex Josie, the aide of the British aide of Lee Kuan Yew that Hilaire de Berrière mentioned in that passage I read. I think he wrote a biography. I haven't read it, of Lee Kuan Yew. But it's a man steering his ship of state from crisis to crisis. It's not like Apollonian drawing up a constitution and handing it as tablets to the people, There's no amount of ideology or word selling that can solve the problems that Lee Kuan Yew did. It's his instincts and his desire to better the ship of state. And by the way, don't fool yourself, you libtards, those of you who say, oh, this is a proof you can have advanced, modern, multiracial, multi-confessional state that is prosperous and modern, and sure, Russia is that way too, by the way, and Moscow is a very modern city. But here's what's required to keep it together. Here's Lee Kuan Yew speaking later in his career. This is from a speech given during 1980s, I think, explaining how he dealt with identitarians.
We had to lock up people without trial, whether they are communists, whether they are language chauvinists or religious extremists. If you don't do that, the country would be in ruins today. I say without the slightest remorse that we wouldn't be here, we would not have made the economic progress if we had not intervened on very personal matters
who your neighbor is, how you live, the noise you make, how you spit or where you spit, or what language you use. Had we not done that and done it effectively, we would not be here today.
Yes, you see, and so you need basically totalitarian police powers. It's not quite a free state. It's a fine balance, both of having a majority that's like 70% or so of the state that's confident of itself, sets the cultural gravity of the state, and a leader like this, who is their representative and is able and willing to tell the chauvinists, and Putin does the same, by the way, also known as identitarians, calm down, and we can keep this multi-ethnic state together, and you can all enjoy your own language and history and identity at home, but in public, in political life, you shut up about it and you leave others be, which of course none of these supposedly race-blind people in the United States, they're not willing to do that in America. They just want to lecture white people not to be ethnic identitarians, but they make multiple allowances for others to be. Of course, it doesn't work that way. It's very unfair besides, but it doesn't work when you do that. But if you're willing to do that and to exercise Singapore or Japan level police, I'm not saying that's possible in America, though it should, but in fact, I don't see any, let's say, liberal authoritarians of this kind who are willing to tell anybody except white people that's chauvinism, and you don't get to insert your ethnic fixations into public discourse. That's not done here. It's in poor taste even. It's not policed by American society. So anyway, despite all these natural disadvantages, Lee Kuan Yew again managed to do as good as can be done with the material he had, and that's the test of the lawgiver or founder. You see mention of this in Rousseau. The founder of a state must look to abilities or circumstances of his people, see how far they can go. If they're people by the sea or fishermen, he can do such and such. If they're inland farmers, it's a very different path. Another interesting aspect here, though, is the use of English in Singapore. I saw someone make this observation recent, I forget who, but in almost all cases of decolonization, the post-colonial state had leftover English-speaking local elites, but English-speaking holdovers, from the colonial period, and these got very fast voted out. They pushed out of office by nativist populists. And, we don't want no white man's colonial language and this. We want to go back to our ancestral ways. And I guess that most Twitter nationalist rightists and identitarians would emotionally agree with what I just said. They are the same type of people, but those almost are always the forces of retardation, regression. Lee Kuan Yew was a very Anglified Chinese man. Harry Lee was his real name, okay? He was born Harry. He studied at Cambridge. I think his first language was English. And he himself later felt pressed to put on the nationalist Chinese anti-colonial thing. Oh, my name's really Lee Kuan Yew, and I'm returning to our Hakka Peranakan heritage. Hakka food is great, by the way. It's slightly different from other Chinese foods. If you ever see Hakka restaurant in America, give it a try. It's a bit rare. It's more like, do you like sticky rice, savory thing with porks, abacus seeds, or whatever? So anyway, despite these nods to post-colonial nationalist sentiment of the Peranakan, these are the Straits Chinese, the overseas Chinese community in Malaysia and so on, Lee Kuan Yew went precisely the opposite way. And having secured control over Singapore, he extended that colonial elite model to everyone else instead. So while at the time of independence, I think only 20% of Singapore spoke English, now everybody speaks English. And this decision integrated Singapore into world American Anglo-led economy, laid future basis, prosperity Singapore as a port city whose wealth depended in large part on logistics of commercial operations, trade, port operations. Its openness to the world was necessity. A turn away from the English out of spite against colonial heritage would have been fatal, at least in their case of Singapore. But it's another example of a wise measure taken against multiple pressures of emotions. Maybe, that's a measure, as I tell you, of the people's capabilities and of what he saw that was possible. He took the best path that was available to them, navigating, yes, obstacles, crises and coups at every turn. This is why I admire this man. He did with what he had as best as he could and beyond what would have been expected of him to achieve. I think beyond the powers of any normal man. And that said, the end result is far short of what is best as such. It's a kind of a glorified mall. And this is what I want to talk on the next segment, and to show you that the man's achievement and his worth as a man can't really just be measured by the ultimate results, especially in political life. There's innate limitations of biology and history and circumstance. The limitations of modern life are such that even in best of cases, even if you were to solve all of your problems, the results probably will still be very banal. I will talk this on the next and final short segment of this episode. I will be right back. I'm exhausted. I need extra Indian, Native American Indian Cherokee tobaccos. And Mr. Newsom is now preparing a blunt for me. I'll be right back. Walking through Asian cities, Singapore in particular, where eventually you get tired of chili crab and you want to know, besides these bars of vapid people, is there anything to do? I want to tell you my complaints, the sense of melancholy at ideas of lost and possible worlds. These cities that don't have the same problems as Western cities. In fact, all the things people complain about in West Europe, United States, parts of South America that are developed, same problems don't exist in the Orient. So many visitors, tourists leave amazed. This is what city life could be like. I could not remember this. I wish we had this in the West. They're angry at wasted opportunities. In America and Europe have imposed on themselves unnecessary problems, fruitless problems. It's not like there's a cost benefit where, we have Nogs, schizophrenic Nogs screaming in our face, but better art because of it. Or you have Bataclan, but we are creating amazing art and symphonies, or a moon colony. That's not what's happening in the West. It's just unnecessary crap imported. And as for my complaints, though, about life in general, when these problems are already solved, and walking aimlessly at night through Asian cities, but they are the same complaints I've always had, and maybe they're similar to your complaints. At the moment, I'm happy to say that I have no profession, I have no ties really to anyone, no family, I have no country, no identity. I have no identity. I'm working to free myself still, as I always have, from all those things that constrain mankind, but are said by the misguided to be its essence. In some way I seek to, from point of view of the normal fags, from their point of view I seek to be absolutely nothing. To be someone of no qualities and because being something besides one nameless thing, I mean, but that is nameless to them because the many do not even suspect it at all to exist. But otherwise I find constraining and arid lack of freedom to be anything at all in their sense, in the many's way of being. The only thing I find a pleasure to be connected to in that sense is my few friends, and you don't know who they are, by the way. But aside from this, human associations and being together of various kind, complete useless. Also, possessions useless. You must get rid of possessions. I own almost nothing, and for most of my life, I had to be put through, though experience is similar to just about those of any other man. The worst of these was having to have a normal job, and then the next worst was to be forced by necessity to be around people I despised. And then the third worst was to be around so-called girlfriends who are just holes who have the effrontery to make demands on you. I was talking recently to, I don't know if you still want me to say his name, but, Menaquinon IV, who is responsible for creating so much of the lore and memes and ideas and sensibility of the online right when it was at its height in 2016 and 15. 2015 more like. 2016 we were already being invaded by retardation. But he recently pointed out to me something that I've noticed also for a long time, that even very successful people, feel like they're underemployed and that their talents have been wasted for their whole lives. And that's a sign of catastrophic inability to mobilize, to allocate human capital. That's really ultimately problem America and Europe, that unlike Singapore in 1965, actually they may have at the moment more men of genius, demographically maybe so, than existed at the height of Italian Renaissance or archaic Greece. And yet their talents, their powers, their claws go to waste. And let's not talk, that's kind of a ridiculous point to bring up, because you shouldn't even ask about philosophy that is so foreign to us. What are the high arts? I'm not even talking about Michelangelo, but let's say, or the grand cities imagined by Albert Speer and so on. But even just the world of bourgeois high commerce and industry that could reasonably exist now. Maybe a moon base as a technological marvel. But everyone now is doing far less than they want to be doing. And in this whole Trump revolution moment of the past 10 years, there's an effort to redefine this international upturning, because there are Trump analogues, Argentina and Brazil and West Europe and Japan. And there's an effort by the opponents of this to redefine it as the complaints of the left behind, of the victims, of those, of the losers disfavored by globalism. And there may be such constituencies, and they may very well have glommed on to Trump, for example, as have irrelevant other factions like the religious and so on. I don't mean the religious people, I mean the religious intellectuals. But this was not the primary reason for Trump's rise, nor that of others like him around the world. The men I'm talking about to you now, sometimes they confide in me, sometimes I will not say they're billionaires or close to billionaires. And what I'm hearing from friends, I'm trying to say to you, you can find a man as successful as it gets on paper, a man who a normal fag would have no cause for complaint, either what I just said or professionals with resumes as stellar as you can find, and almost to a man the professionals all tell me the same thing, every single one of them, that they want to do one last deal to get the mega money so they can comfortably not have to work. Now, what that means in their case, I don't know. I tell them, why can't you do that now? Well, they have families. They want to, I don't know, they want to live a certain way. I could always live on next to nothing, by the way, and I would encourage those among you of whatever age who feel harried in the United States or West Europe, that you can live in a city like Medellin, Colombia, very well, or used to be. Please don't take my word for it. Take a scouting trip first, of course. You take a 2-week scouting trip always, but you used to be able to live there for $1,200 well, for $1,800 a month really well. I used to be able to live for $2,000 a month in all manner of cities around the world extremely well. And now dollar's still strong and something like that, but I would maybe encourage some to leave the United States rather than put up with. But look, that's not what these men mean. So, and then even, let's say, someone beyond the 1%, someone a billionaire or close to, will confide in me occasionally that they're unhappy in some way. They feel like at every stage of their life, they were not what they had hoped and not what it could have been. That's a sign of terminal level civilizational failure when even people like that say, maybe you don't have a global favela yet, right? I mean, at some point, you may have global favela, and the highest a man could aspire to is to be the leader of a factory in like Lugansk and go to nightclub bottle service with a gangster's mall, and you're the gangster and the gangster factory owner, and that's about the height of life to perpetuity. Maybe but it's pretty much what communism was, by the way, is what I'm saying, where no matter how high you got in your profession, you were always held back and frustrated. Even if you, quote unquote, made to top, you look back on your life, you feel like at every stage your dreams never came true. And then the people who are executors of that system of shabby authoritarian mediocrity, the ones in government, I didn't know any of them, but who can tell if they experienced pleasures in overseeing a society run like a Bulgarian supermarket? Could you take pleasure of that? I suppose to a certain human type, but I suppose right now in West, you live in a slightly modified version of this giant East Bloc food distribution center, this emerging global economy. There's not one part of this that isn't shabby and isn't felt, I tell you, by men and women at every level of society, lowest to highest. They feel held back. Their qualities, their claws never had a chance to come out and exhibit themselves. This is a big reason, I suppose, why my book, Bronze Age Mindset, which, funny title, but it's not really about the Bronze Age, but the description of how precisely you live in prison world. And I'm afraid that all solutions on the table now do nothing to change that. And consider one of the craziest solutions. So many people now talking about religion. Well, let me pick a religion that I am somewhat friendly to. Suppose as thought experiment, the entire nation convert to pagan Odinism. And, you get your wish back. Now, they're pagan Odinist animists. You can have revival of Savitri Devi, Neo-Shinto, Aryan Odinism in the West. But if all that changes is theological form, you can very easily have the same suffocating prison exist now, but with Odinist words on top of it. And now you understand why I so often attack not so much the average religious man, which I don't care, is not my concern, but in this case, the religious political intellectual who is rearranging outer dresses and ornaments, seeks to place, excuse to repeat, I've used this phrase, bells and lights and whistles, redecorate the bars of the cage. And it's so bad, actually, that even Hitlerism can be repurposed exactly to this. There are attempts now to rehabilitate Hitler by showing, in fact, he was a good multiracial leftist. He was Mo Foggin, wholesome socialist and a defender of diversity, human rights against evil globalists. And really everything the modern mind touches turns to this same fetid swamp. And that's because the hardest thing of all, which is a revolution in morality, that is as far from us as it ever was. Actually, even the words of that, you don't understand what means morality, because what's at stake here isn't what you merely claim to think is right and wrong, but actually effective precursors of that, where man's weight of feeling is, what motive moves him, states of psyche that he's acquainted with, things that he pursues that are reflected in the music he likes. And as long as these don't change and the driving engine of the world remains Judain, or what Nietzsche called Judain, the feelings of victimization and the righteous anger at avenging real or imagined victimization by rapist oppressors, the concern over exploitation, as long as that, nothing fundamentally can change if that's the drive. But I go on tangent and tell you about Asian cities and Asian life. I can't recommend enough living in East Asia for a while, because there's nothing to take you out of jadedness like travel to alien world, snap you out of yourself. At first it will strike you very alien, the chaos of an Asian city. The food's almost uniformly good across East Asia. I think the Philippines would be an exception. But by the way, Indonesia, I don't want to repeat myself, but in Indonesia you can have beef rendang and dip crunch into sauce. The Malays have this roti canai. I could eat this. You dip crunch, kind of phyllo, oily bread into curry kind of sauce. I'm sorry, but I like Asian foods, and even the Tokyo subway system, so famous for its efficiency, constant urban chaos. In fact, the train stations in Tokyo designed to aggress and humiliate you. You don't know where the entrance and exits are. Even the natives are bullied by the station design. They remark on this. There are many bullying chaos all over, endless entertainment for you. You've seen images of attendant pushing crowds during rush hour into train car, like concentration camp going. But that happens in China, in Japan too, Shinjuku stations during rush hour. These masses of workers, they live in peace. And in Japan, there is also an alien orderliness and quiet among. If you've never, I have a friend I see recent tell me he was not surprised because he had seen that quiet and professional order in Germany. I don't know. In China, it's not like that. It's still a recently peasant, a kind of masculine energy on the street. I'm told they spit, they belch, they are loud. I don't know mainland China though. Nearly all Asian cities smell bad and include the elements you'd recognize as third world. Sometimes in Seoul, a smell wafts on you. It's almost biological, chemical warfare. I've remarked before on the favela-like aspects. In some way, all Asian cities are just reformed favelas, very cleaned up slums, even the nice Japanese cities. I remember walking in Kyoto, supposedly ancient, beautiful cities. Actually, the streets are sparkling clean in Kyoto, but you get very much a whiff sometimes of how it's arranged. Much the same way streets are in Bali. It feels the same way, with everything from the gutter ditch by the side of the road to the nature of the houses, the layout of everything. It's very different from European cities, and it's very much arranged for slum life and armies of scooters. They don't take place in Japan, but they are everywhere else in Asia and Southeast Asia. And in these details, there's endless entertainment for you to observe, at least for the grace period, honeymoon period of any place, the first month to 3 months, and then endlessly stimulating. Will take you out of boredom immediately. The lights especially is what hits people at first. The LED signs, monitors now, of course, with anime playing and restaurants, but the signage in commercial districts, each business outside of has its own sign outside of the building, and it's very refreshing to see then also urban areas with bars, restaurants totally full of natives as opposed to just tourists. You go Europe, it's simply tourist and old asylum, but it's very refreshing. You go a place where people actually still live and work. They go home from work when their workplace closed. They enjoy dinner and getting plastered drunk, as opposed to just tourists again. People, restaurants to cater to every taste. I say this in every bit of entertainment to stave off feelings of jadedness. And I remember my night walks in American cities. At 2 or 3 a.m., I would be mumbling to myself, alone, the only one on the street, and if the police didn't stop me, and often on a winter night even, I would take long walks to brood over my plans for the hue of the fire that must overtake and reform this world. Is it to be a green fire? But many times I'd be walking without a thought in my head, a kind of thoughtless, empty, very nice listen to ambient musics, and I could tell taxi drivers were sometimes scared of me. They would wonder why I would be the only one on the street at night. And these were populated cities. But, there's that scene I like, Journey to the End of the Night. The normal fags never want to see what's waiting for you at the hour of the demon, 6 a.m. But actually, most streets everywhere empty by 3 a.m. Well before. Tokyo is surprisingly empty at 6 a.m. There's a business district. Look, this is just my reveries about the business district in Tokyo, Marunouchi. I like to walk around there at the time people get off from work. The district by itself is not charming. There's nothing special there. It's not one of the neighborhoods of Tokyo that is in the guidebooks for having nice character. It's actually very old. It's next to the Imperial Palace, and it's one of the old parts of Edo of Tokyo, but was entirely rebuilt, of course, destroyed in the war and rebuilt. Now it's a business district without really charming streets, just large skyscrapers, and people walk in the streets in between. But I like very much walking there, the look of the buildings at night, the light from certain rooftop gardens, which Tokyo does so well. I like to sit and contemplate the lives of the workers who are working, they're late to fantasize about being one of them. I feel sometimes I keep repeating longing, painful for the lives of normal fags. Have you ever wanted to be a 20-year-old woman doing vegetable shopping in a Brazilian fruit supermarket at 1 a.m.? I don't know, I feel a great sadness but I've had romantic dreams about being even inanimate object, excuse to repeat, like an ashtray and such. But I think you can't know something fully until you know all the smells associated with it. If I think back since childhood, my most powerful memories have always been smell, and the most characteristic way I know a city is its smell in different seasons. I find the smell of people, however, mostly revolting. On account of this, I'm glad to be a Volcel, but certain types of women's perfume evoke powerful triggers, lost memories. This is what I mean. There are women who are amazed, though, at my scent. After a workout, they become addicted to me. I can tell they are possibly in a daze at my scent. Their eyes go blank. They're high on the power of pheromones. My power is impetuous. Anyway, look, I get off track on many things. I mean to say that as I look out on the expanse of the windows, the lights at night of these Asian metropolis, after the novelty and the excitement has worn off, and I'm back to my mania, trying to inhabit different people, and the only true excitement is gone, I start to dawn on me, that nothing is ever going to happen in this city. And all due respect to the people who say China is the future, I wonder what the future of what, because Singapore is the best China, the best that China can ever aspire to. China would be elated if all of its cities could be like Singapore, and I know Singapore pretty well by now. I can tell you nothing will ever happen in Singapore. There is not a nook or cranny where anything approaching anything interesting or great can creep into that place. It has none of the problems of cities in the West have. It's clean. It doesn't have homeless. It doesn't have obnoxious people making noise or terrorism or being a nuisance. Life is getting more expensive for the native Singaporeans too. They complain, but not to the point that average people can't live in their own city. Name a Western problem, whatever it is, from problems with migrants to, dirty streets. It doesn't exist in Tokyo. Not even the obnoxious feminism, actually, or what makes life especially difficult for many men is the chubby girls. I remember appearing in Manhattan even by the 2010s, and people are thin all over East Asia. I know it's not geriatric cities. It's not true. Yes, you see catastrophically low birth rates on paper, but in Seoul, which in certain intersections, Seoul is built to look just like Tokyo, by the way, and I believe the Chinese cities are also modeled on Japanese cities to look like them. But these cities are full of young people. They have plenty of demographic potential to persevere for the far future, by the way. But there's a feeling in all these places that the only thing that will ever happen is people getting jobs, and maybe some will get good jobs, and their mom will applaud and they'll feel proud that, oh, look, Chinwen got a job. I don't want to use Japanese name. I love the Japanese people. Look, I am a credit to the white race in Japan. I was joking. I offered the Japanese police very fancy whiskey. Look, but they take a photograph of themselves after work. Albert, let's say, Albert. Operations manager, logistics executive in Singapore, fancy bar, have cocktails, have Armani t-shirt, take photograph, pop champagne to put with friends on Instagram. Many are wearing Gucci, and if you think I exaggerate and focus only on things that traditionalists find frivolous, and I'm not criticizing the luxury or consumerist aspect of it. I don't consider if Albert, hypothetical Albert, went to church and formed a family, or to temple, Buddhist temple, same thing, and production of another Albert to continue this charade in the form of a family, that also would not be any improvement. It's just a repetition of this for the next 30,000 years. And how is that tolerable, or even better than total regression to Neanderthal cannibalism? How is it better than coming heroic Stone Age to the end of time? I would much prefer that. Excuse me. I don't mean to say the cities of the West or the Third World are a path to that either. Now, maybe if the West solved its political problems, because all of these problems that you complain about are fundamentally political, the homeless is not, that's a political will problem. I mean, when it comes to why the cities and everyday life is shithole in the West, I mean, but maybe the West has higher potential once those problems are solved, higher potential than Singapore and even Tokyo, and can then free up its population of smart and creative men to do great things, but I'm not sure. You can even say Tokyo manages to dominate much of world culture through things like anime. So, that's something, but it's something tiny. It's not a part of Japanese life. It's something, I feel a great closing off of all possibilities of life in all these modern cities, even the successful ones. They appear grand, the buildings are beautiful at night, they look like castles, they're soaring Faustianly in the sky. The lights hypnotize me, the alleys in Hong Kong, behind the skyscrapers, they seem to imply some mystery, some very glamorous conspiracy. This is my imagining that there could be secrets whispered in these narrow paths of Hong Kong, or even in my long walks before in American cities, that I imagine there were plots hatched, enterprising, diabolical minds, bold strategizing, the overthrow of states, at least the palace coup, and that was years ago, but nothing ever happens. Elon's dreams, aside from Trump's comedic swagger that at least shook things up, and that was something new in the world, but Elon's dreams were to remind people that great projects can still exist, but ultimately I think they were just talk. Where is Mars? I don't know. Look, I will bet you. What do you want me to bet you? I will be publicly sodomized on TV if Elon takes you to Mars in the next 5 years, 10 years. It won't. These rich men are brain fucked by talking points that my friend and I designed 15 years ago on image boards and forums. They're addicted to getting acclaim from the equivalent of Bangalore bot farms, as far as they know. They don't know who's praising them online. The dumbest computer game of all, the social media. I would respect Elon and all these guys more if they were addicted to Wing Commander computer game more than what they're doing now, the online posting. Paul LaRue, he was addicted to Wing Commander. Look up Paul LaRue. I mentioned him on second episode of this program. Criminal mastermind, exceeding ambition. At least that's something, drugs, arms trafficking, precious and gold metal smuggling, money laundering. He put his hands into everything. And so many different criminal enterprises, I have to think he was just connoisseur of criminality. He couldn't stop getting into logging, trying to take over the farms in Zimbabwe. This is a man of criminal enterprise, and I only admire this relish, the criminal connoisseur of the apocalypse, this dried out heap that you call the world today. It's not a world. To call it, the Gnostics would call it a labyrinth of shadows. That's far too romantic. All life has been drained out of every part of it. And it has to be violated, raped, every which way. And the criminal Paul LaRue, he's, I feel, my spiritual partner. Epstein was a pussy for not being what they claimed that he was. Every one of this world's delusions, it's not a world, it's kind of half nursing home, half prison. It must be raped, every one of its delusions, until the issue of this rape, so many bastard monsters born, run a rampage over it. You look at the grand cupolas, the avenues that Albert Speer had in mind for a city, the vision of a future of man's harrowing will stretching out into space, alien and otherworldly to everything you know right now, a life of true struggling and discipline, ready to transform from this everyday being into leave it behind like caterpillar, to leave all of this behind. And thousands of great minds that the world of will could have given the tools to achieve great feats. And then from that potential to see this petty life of small claims, small visions, but most of all small feelings, the pettiest feelings, where the highest aim of these nationalist and populist parties now is to have the wretched comforts of domestic perpetuity. At least the streets of Kyoto, I guess, are sparkling clean. You can get a tranny blowjob in Osaka, but the streets will be clean. I'd rather the world burn than it evolve to this. And I encourage, and by the way, it's not the tranny thing, because I encourage my friends among you to use these crises to install yourself over the next turbulent decades, and never forget that the only thing that matters is the possibility of greatness and its rebirth in this utterly degraded trash world. This is what I've tried to say in many episodes, Caribbean Rhythms, the rebirth of the bright burning sun of the south, a somber tropical sun to scorch you. Nothing else matters but the possibility of action and life of a very few, and the organization of all things to that end. This few must feel entitled and must not fight for anything else but the initiation of grand projects, that millions can be sacrificed for these projects, and this is ever forgotten. Only the deepest feelings of regret will stay with you or your progeny, no matter how clean streets you get or how healthy family formation you allow in your cities. Fundamentally, the life of a Singaporean or a Tokyoite, as good as it is compared to shithole cities of the West, it's as meaningless as anywhere else in the world, as little consequence comes from it. And all the huffing and puffing now is really, this is what gets me mad about political talk now. It's useless. It's of ultimately no concern to me. I've always seen the political tumults of our time only as a vehicle for me and my friends, because their actual aim, though, is just to crawl out of one hole so you can live in another hole, a kind of neuter pastureland mall. That's what modern life is at its best in Singapore. There is no grace to this world, you see. So I say don't seek to do good. Every good actually is obscure for you now. And this is not to demoralize, because that blindness is actually freedom. You should seek to break every good that exists, break every tablet, smash everything, annihilate everything that exists. I dream of a lithe, oiled, tanned bodybuilder squadrons of death, Legions of Annihilation, who with nudity and protruding cocks will break through the senescent veil of a sleeping world and awaken ancient powers in the dawn of day again. Until next time, I hope you enjoy Show 200, Show 201 coming soon. Until next time, BAP out!